Welcome to Bachiko Witang Runde. I'm Gary Wiryawan, and today we're going to talk about the only lens that you will need, the Panasonic 12-35mm f2.8. Before we continue with the video, this is just a quick reminder for you to support my channel by liking this video, by sharing this video, and subscribing to my channel down below. So let's continue with the video. So, the Panasonic 12-35mm f2.8 is a general focal length lens with a large aperture of f2.8. This is the micro four thirds version of the full frame 24-70mm f2.8 or the APS-C version of the 16-55mm f2.8 with focal length ranging from 12mm all the way up to 35mm. This lens can cover everything from landscape, portrait, environmental portrait, street photography, product photography, travel photography, and many other photography genres. So, this lens is equipped with optical image stabilizer, which really helps you to take sharper shots at slower shutter speed or getting steady video shot. The relatively large aperture of f2.8 will really help you to get better shots at low light, as well as to get more subject isolation, especially when zoomed out to 35mm bokeh. This lens is not that much bigger than a Canon crop body kit lens, and it has really great build quality as well as some degree of weather sealing. Speaking of image quality, the image quality of the pictures taken using this lens is exceptional. All the important requirements that people usually consider, such as sharpness, contrast, and the overall look of the image, are all excellent on this lens. The autofocus of this lens on single shot is excellent. However, as with all micro four thirds lenses and cameras, it still struggles a little bit when it comes to continuous autofocus. I use this lens extensively ever since I got the lens back in 2014, and it has become my most used lens when it comes to photography and video. I took this lens to many different places around the world, and the combination of both the focal length and the slightly large aperture proved to be extremely valuable. At 12mm, I was able to capture landscapes as well as general sceneries as well as general event photography that doesn't require me to use ultra wide angle lens. At 35mm, I was able to use this lens for portrait, for semi-macro shots, for detail photography, product photography, as well as for some bokeh shots. In between 12mm and 35mm, I was able to find focal lengths such as 18mm and 25mm, which are the classic focal length for street photography, for environmental portrait, and many other photography genres. So as you can see, with just this one lens, I can cover so many different photography genres, and this can perform as the only lens that I need to bring, especially for travel photography. Zoom out at 12mm and you get this field of view. Zoom in at 35mm and you get that angle of view, and that's the luxury of using a zoom lens. However, as many professional photographers suggested, I treated this lens more like a bunch of a prime lens built into one lens rather than treating this lens like a zoom in and zoom out lens. This way of thinking really forces me to think before I shot. What I mean by that is I have to pre-visualize the picture before I even take the shot, and that also means that I have to choose the right focal length that suits my pre-visualization. This pre-visualization before you take the shot is actually a very important concept in photography because it will help you to improve your skill in photography. I have trained my eyes to really understand how tight the framing of the 35mm is and how wide the framing of the 12mm is, so that means I can frame the shot before I even grab my camera. And this is the kind of skill that I think you really need to be able to improve your photography skill much further. And I really think that the 12-35mm focal length is a really good focal length for you to develop your skill in pre-visualization. So you can develop that skill by using the focal length provided in this lens. And that means my familiarity with the 12-35mm focal length really helped me to become comfortable in using it and trusting it for for many different photography situations. And that means 12-35mm f2.8 is the only lens that I'll need. One thing that I noticed after using this lens for so long is that this lens is so good and so capable that this lens contributed to help me to think less about gear. Now you might ask, how is that even possible? Well, all that I can say is that I am not tempted by a newer lens in the same category, such as the Panasonic Leica 12-60mm f2.8 to f4 or other similar lenses, because this lens is simply more than good enough for what I need. In the world of camera technology, every day you are being bombarded by new camera bodies, by new camera lenses, newer technologies, newer this and newer that, and usually they are more expensive and they only provide minimal improvement of image quality. So, having a reliable lens, high quality lens that can cover a lot of your photography and video needs really help to reduce the need to have the greatest and the latest camera technology equipment. That means you can focus more on creating great content, whether it is photography or video. And that will simply mean you are being more productive with your photography or video. Now let's talk about alternative lens. So you might ask, why not use a super zoom lens like this 14-140mm lens? It covers more focal length than the 12-35mm and it is as sharp as the 12-35mm. To answer that, I can simply say that most of my keeper shots were actually taken with focal lengths under 50mm, and that is exactly the focal length of this lens. Unless you are required to use telephoto focal length, then I think the 12-35mm will provide more than enough focal length for you. The large aperture of f2.8 compared to f3.5 to f5.6 is much better for you because it can help you under low light situation, such as when you are shooting indoor or shooting when the daylight is almost gone. And the f2.8 aperture could really help you to separate the backgrounds from your subject, especially at 35mm bokeh. I mean, everything surely depends on your needs, not my needs. And if your main photography genre is wildlife or sport photography or action photography, then maybe a lens like this or a dedicated telephoto lens with larger aperture might help you. But for most of us, especially for me, 80% of your photography and video needs can be done using the 12-35mm lens. Now let's talk about alternative lens of the same category, such as the Panasonic Leica 12-60mm f2.8 to f4 or the Olympus 12-40mm f2.8. They are all providing similar focal lengths with large aperture, just like the 12-35mm f2.8. If you haven't already invested in one of the lenses of this category, then any of the choice within that category will probably suit you best. You just have to pick the one that is right for you. However, if I have to start over again and pick one lens of that category, I will still pick this lens, the 12-35mm f2.8 or its newer Mark II version of the same lens, simply because it has constant f2.8 aperture combined with the optical image stabilizer, which will really help me to get steady shot during video or sharper shot during lower light situations. So that is all for today's video. I hope you find this video to be useful. Please let me know in the comments down below what is your favorite lens and why. Also, don't forget to support my channel by liking this video, by sharing this video and subscribing to my channel down below. Thank you and goodbye.